Welcome to the Sage Family Podcast,
where we explore natural homeschooling, gentle parenting,
simple living, and family adventure.
I'm Rachel Rainbolt, the Sage Parenting Coach, coming to you from the Pacific Northwest, where I live wild and free in connection with my 3 wildlings and the Papa Bear in our fixer-upper on the beach. This is episode 26, and today I'm here with Julie Bogart talking about being a brave learner. Julie is the force behind the online writing program and podcast Brave Writer, the Weekly Habit Poetry Teatime, the Homeschool Alliance online coaching community, and the upcoming book Brave Learner. She lives in Cincinnati, Ohio, and can be found sipping a cup of tea, planning her next visit to one of her lifelong learning kids. So join us around the campfire and let's get living the family life of our dreams. Shout out to our new patron, Julie Webb. As Sky likes to say, thanks for being awesome. If you are loving the Sage Family Podcast, you can become a part of it too through Patreon, where you can support these important conversations, help make this show great, and get rewards doing it. The adventure of the week this episode is going to be me catching you up on our end of 2018 winter fun. Our hack school adventure the 3rd week in December was Winterfest, where we went downtown to Seattle Center with friends for ice skating, ice sculpting, which was canceled at the last minute, so we just rolled with it and moved on to lunch, and a sweet scavenger hunt at the cutest model train village. Then a dear friend hosted the most lovely winter solstice celebration. I'll take traditions around nature, light, love, and intention over obligation, consumerism, and behavioral manipulation. I'm looking at you, creepy spy elf. She had set up a beautiful evergreen winter spiral on her deck. Each person walked into the center of the spiral thinking about what they want to release from the previous year, lit their candle, walked outward thinking about what they wanted to invite more of for the new year, and set their candle along the spiral. I posted a photo on Instagram and you all loved it, so I've set the intention to write more about our holiday traditions next year. Our last hack school event of 2018 was a trip to a snowy mountain town to visit the Leavenworth Reindeer Farm. We stopped for sledding along the way and had snow play adventures with friends late into the night. Then on farm day, we got to learn all about reindeer around the fire behind the barn, and we even got to enter their fields and feed them by hand. It was pretty special experiential learning that we will not forget. Then snowball fights and hours of sledding all the way home.
Point of fact, we did not actually sled and snowball fight all the way home. The snow stopped about halfway down the mountain.
Point of fact, when you record a podcast intro with children in the room, they will fact check you. Also, they drools and mommy rules.
No, I'm the winner. I get the winner macaroni dinner.
Most of the adventures I share here during the adventure of the week are hack school experiences. Hack School is the homeschool adventure club I have run for years, in which we enjoy weekly adventures with like-minded friends. It's a big piece to our natural homeschooling lifestyle of joy, connection, and freedom. And I have listened to so many of you share with me your longing for friendship, for yourself and your kids, your desire to get out from behind worksheets and make the whole world your classroom, your struggle to bear the weight of judgment from others, and your hesitance around trying to create the tribe you seek. So I created just for you the Hack School Leadership class. In this class, I walk you through building your tribe by setting up and running your own local hack school group, organizing fun adventures that harness experiential learning and connect you with friends, nature, and your community, and leading a group of like-minded families by establishing and maintaining a culture of authenticity and kindness. If you are ready to bring socialization, experiential learning, and leadership skills, all while producing the evidence that satisfies legal requirements and critical family members, then click the link for the Hack School Leadership class in the show notes, or visit sageparenting.com/hackschool-leadership. That's HACKSCHOOL-leadership. You don't have to be alone on this natural homeschooling revolution. Today, Julie Bogart is joining me to share a conversation on being a brave learner. As a homeschooling mama, it's impossible not to know the name Julie Bogart and her brilliant company, Brave Writer. Her passion, wisdom, and experience are so valuable, but it's her humility and warmth that keep me feeling inspired. The new season of her podcast is incredible, and her new book, Brave Learner, captures her signature encouragement and guidance. I've been so looking forward to sharing a conversation with her, and the day is upon us. So tell us your story, Julie. Who are you? What are you passionate about? What about your relationships in life fulfill you? And what is your relationship with this topic of being a brave learner?
Wow, Rachel, thank you so much for inviting me to your podcast. First of all, I love your Instagram, and I feel like we are a kindred spirit. So
I could not agree more. In my imaginary world, you're like my homeschooling auntie.
oh my gosh, that's adorable. I love that thought. Well, I very much enjoy being a part of this robust, awesome community of today's modern home educators. I am noticing that all those things I really longed for back in the dark ages before the internet, when there were very few people who homeschooled, when my pediatrician for my kids didn't even know what homeschooling was, that those things now exist. There's connection without having to be in the same location. There is a wide range of resources to choose from, not just a few. There are opportunities to go and get encouragement, not just curriculum shopping at conferences. And so I really love the values and culture of homeschooling. If I had to pick one thing that I don't regret, that I would do over in a minute, it is homeschooling. There is something so fundamental about the connection you build as a family through learning that transcends anything else I've ever done. I feel like it offered me a vehicle, a mechanism for having those family traditions, inside jokes, culture, memories that I longed for, that I imagined would be the outcome of being a family. Somehow, homeschooling provided that in a way even beyond what I imagined. I watched my adult children, their connection, the way they share with each other, and I know that I owe it to the home education culture we created in our family.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I love that. And it's really neat too to get to see how your kids are grown now. So, to sort of get to see your anecdotes on the other side of this, like the deep end that so many of us are in. Like, I know your son just got married, and seeing all of your stories around that experience. It's really inspiring and just, kind of motivating and nourishing for us that are still here sometimes in the weeds.
Totally. Oh my goodness. I was constantly latching on to people whose kids were older than mine. It was like they had the flashlight and I was on the path behind them. I totally get it.
Yes. It's like how, mixed age play is so brilliant. It's one of these great benefits of homeschooling. And the research shows that it has all these tremendous benefits for kids. And that's how it works for us adults too. Like, all of our friends are different ages, and there's such tremendous benefit for that dynamic.
Completely agree.
Okay, let's talk about real learning. So really, what is real learning from your perspective?
So William Rhinesmith, who is an education reformer, he's a noted authority on learning, teaching, how those work together. He says that real learning connotes use. In other words, you haven't learned something unless you can use it. Yeah. And that kids attach meaning to what they learn when they can put it into use today. not when they're preparing for college, not when they think they'll use it in their future careers. So, one of the things I think we have to stand on its head is this idea that we're teaching kids things they need for a future date. We're constantly seeing learning as preparation for something better down the road.
Right.
And what I would invite us to consider is that the learning that we want our kids to have needs to be valuable to them on their terms for today. That's what leads to real learning.
I could not agree more. I'm often arguing that it's not the regurgitated short-term memorization that a test score can show, or even the completion of like a large volume of product, like 100 plug and chug problems on a math worksheet. Because, a related side note, I earned so many A's and produced so many completed worksheets without ever really learning any of the material. If you had put me in a situation to use any of those concepts in the real world, I would have been completely lost. So in your new book, you point out, quote, "We usually require evidence of suffering to prove a child is getting an education," which is so messed up and so true. Because the real learning is when new experiences or awarenesses connect with existing knowledge in their web of understanding. And that only happens when something is meaningful for them in the present. You talk about our role in supporting real learning as sparking, quote, "an awakening to the need to know." And I loved that.
Thank you. That's fun to hear you quote those things back. You know, one of the things that I've noticed in my own life and sometimes in the lives of other homeschool families is that when our children look like they are enjoying what they're learning or enjoying what they're doing, or they rip through a worksheet without any struggle, that often produces anxiety in a home educator. They look at that as somehow the student isn't growing, isn't progressing. And so then we lob into our living rooms what I call the homeschool hand grenade of new program, new philosophy, new curriculum, so that our kids look like it's hard again, like it's challenging to them, like they need to struggle, and then we know that they're actually learning something. But what the research shows is that ease is what creates mastery. You want the appropriate level of challenge to skill building. So we don't want the skill development to be so challenging that they wilt in a puddle of tears.
Right.
And we don't want it to be so easy that they get careless and they make mistakes and they don't care. We want that right blend where a child is appropriately challenged, but finds it doable, finds it engaging, wants to continue because they are making progress. And in some cases, they need time to do something over and over before they feel done with it. I have noticed that we tend to move our kids off of what they've mastered very quickly because there's this whole ocean of other information we think they need to know, and we have no time to teach it, right?
Yes. Oh man, yeah, it's like that zone of proximal development. Like there's this sweet zone in the middle, and then it can benefit them to have some things that they can just do easily, like the confidence boosters, the sort of filling in the little tiny gaps that you thought were solid. It's good to have like some of those things that are just easily completed. And then you can have like a few things in the environment that are just like pie in the sky, just beyond their reach, beyond what they can do on their own right now, that they can start, kind of tinkering with. But there's that sweet spot in the middle.
Yeah, no, that's true. And for some kids, the sense of pride that comes from mastery is the joy of repeatedly conquering. So if you have a child who can rip through their times tables over and over on worksheets, you don't want to remove the joy of that experience until it's lost its luster.
Yes.
And I think sometimes we forget that joy is very important to learning. The tagline for Brave Writer for years was "Joy is the best teacher." And I really think that's important to remember. When your children lose joy, they stop learning. Now, they don't have to look like they're jumping on a trampoline level of joy, but there needs to be a feeling of pleasant openness to what they're doing. When they start shutting down, or they're doing it because you said they had to, or just to get to the end because they want lunch, they're not necessarily learning. I like to remind parents all the time, you might have a child that you've just taken off of the computer who was happily engaged in Minecraft. And you're like, okay, that's enough. You've been doing that for an hour. I need you to do the grammar worksheet. And your child can literally do the whole worksheet while they're mentally solving the problem they left behind on Minecraft.
Yes.
Isn't that true?
Yes.
And we are under this weird delusion that we have fulfilled our academic obligation, our educational objectives, simply by getting that worksheet done. And yet, as home educators, we have the opportunity for that not to be the way that we teach, that we see Minecraft in all of its wholesome value to that child. We imagine, I want them to learn grammar. How do I harvest grammar from Minecraft?
Yes.
Not how do I end Minecraft so that I can teach grammar over here as though they don't have any connection.
Yes, using their self-directed interests as a doorway to learning all of the things that would benefit them to learn. And that brings it so much more meaning, because if I'm just giving my kid like a learn how to read curriculum, with examples that aren't relevant to them, versus they're trying to play a video game with their siblings, and to move on, you have to be able to read the things the other characters are saying and the instructions. Like, both of them might be ways of learning to read, but one is going to be so much more meaningful and is going to actually get me to my end goal much faster and much more efficiently than it would be for me to force my kid to sit down and fill out these worksheets. Like, stop playing that game, which is motivating you to learn to read naturally, and come over here and do this thing, because it looks more like my preconceived notion of checking those schoolish boxes.
Exactly. You got it.
Okay, so let's talk about the superpowers, which, I mean, I ran through your book. I just devoured it, read it super quickly, and then read it again and highlighted and took notes because I loved it. And you go over what you call the 12 superpowers, which are broken down into 3 groups. And we all want superpowers, so of course we have to talk about those. So what are the 4 forces of enchantment, and how do they work?
A great question. So when I was looking at how to write about homeschooling as an experience, I wanted to make sure that we didn't get stuck in the weeds of how to register with the state, or how do we fulfill the objectives of Common Core, or what is it to set up a schoolroom. I really wanted us instead to focus on what is the environment that produces the learning, the love of learning that we all long to see in our kids. Every home educator says to me, well, all I want is just for my kids to love learning. And I always find that the most interesting statement, because kids love learning. Yeah. You can't stop them from learning. They're learning all the time.
When toddlers put a rock in their mouth, that is them trying to learn, and they're loving it.
Absolutely. 100%. In fact, literally from the time they wake up till the time they go to bed, they're acquiring all the information that they need to successfully get through that day. So when a parent says, I want my child to love learning, what they're really saying is, I hope they're going to love the school subjects as much as I need them to give them the education I want them to have. That's really what they're asking. Mm-hmm. And so what I noticed was the things that bring that joy or that sense of ownership of what they're learning, when I looked at the characteristics of what that was in a child's life, I noticed that they were drawn often through what I call the forces of enchantment. So when you see a child, for instance, open a birthday present, they are drawn to the present because it is going to be a surprise. It's mysterious. That once they open the gift and they have to figure out how to use it, there's a little bit of risk involved. Am I going to damage it? Is this the way it works? How do I play with it? There's the adventure of a brand new experience. So these properties of enchantment, surprise, mystery, risk, and adventure, characterize so much of what children love.
Yeah.
So when we're thinking about learning English, studying phonics or spelling or reading, a better question to ask than what curriculum should I use is, how can I bathe this experience in one of the forces of enchantment? How can I add an element of surprise or mystery or risk or adventure to the teaching of reading? Should I wrap the brand new reader in wrapping paper and have my child open it like a present? Should I give my child a flashlight and a book and put them in bed at 8 and say, I want you to play under the covers as long as you want, exploring this book. Here's a brand new flashlight. Would it be more interesting to a child to go on an outing, an adventure, to practice reading? Going to a bookstore or a coffee shop, or always doing reading practice at the library. Or maybe it's just something as simple as cuddling up on the couch with you and having that private, dedicated time where they are not going to be interrupted by someone else. Perhaps that is the surprise of the day because they're used to you being busy and distracted.
Yeah.
So as you are thinking about learning, how can we bring these dimensions of surprise, mystery, risk, and adventure into the experience of what we want them to know?
So funny when you talked about gifts. I remembered that right before Christmas time, when we had put all of the presents under the tree, all of my kids pulled out measuring tapes and rulers and were measuring the dimensions of all of the boxes and then looking up dimensions of various gifts that they had hoped to receive. And I remember just standing there thinking, geometry.
That is incredible. I mean, suddenly learning how to find square footage and volume is absolutely practical. And that goes right back to that Rhinesmith quote that I was talking about before, that for anything to be learned, it has to be used.
Yes.
There has to be a useful application. I love that so much. And literally, the surprise and mystery of math are endless, and we teach it in such a rote, deadening way. And I'm not a math person, by the way. Math was ruined for me in 3rd grade. So being able to start to imagine math through a different lens. I remember one of my friends, he's an engineer. And when he would drive with his kids, they would play math games the way my family played, alphabet and language games. And one of the things they would do is they'd be driving down the road, they'd see a semi, and he would ask them to calculate how many items could fit in that semi. The one I remember the most is he said, let's calculate how many frozen chickens could fit in that semi truck. So then they're like, just what you just said, figuring out the basic dimensions from guessing of a semi. How do you even make a meaningful guess? You compare it to a car. How big's a car? How many cars fit in that semi? And then you start calculating the usual size of a frozen chicken. And then you start, and I thought, oh my goodness, I never treated math that way. Like, that's not how I grew up with math.
Yeah.
But if we start that way, then when we get to the page, suddenly we're like, oh, this is the method by which we make those calculations, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about.
It has real world context.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it also has like that sort of joy of surprise and making some guesses. It's very rare that math is taught where we say to a child, here's a problem. How do you think we should solve it? Usually what we say is, here's a problem. Here's how math solves it, as though it's this one monolithic system and everybody does it the same way.
Right. And all that matters is the answer.
Correct. Right.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to work through an example, like to work in this surprise, mystery, risk, adventure, enchantment thing. So let's say dinosaurs had come up as an interest in my family, which happened not too long ago. So like I might put some dinosaur books from the library on featured reading ledges. I might pose the question as we chat about the books, why don't we have any dinosaurs today? I wonder what caused their extinction. I might add a documentary to their streaming list on their iPad. I might set up a featured invitation with their toys, which is when I just plant things in the environment on rotation, which can really be as simple as putting materials together in new and surprising ways, like kinetic sand with dinosaur figures, bones, a meteor rock, and archaeology tools like a toothbrush and a spoon, things like that. I have no attachment to the outcome of the invitations, which is really important, in the sense that they may take the dinosaurs out and make a little movie about them dancing hip hop, and that's okay too, because
Right.
I really see my role as offering and inviting. And then one of my kids might ask to see a real dinosaur bone, and we'll say, yes, let's research how to make that happen. And then we went on an adventure out in the world with our hack school group, which is like our homeschool adventure club, where we went to a university museum with friends and observed the scientists working on this huge T-Rex skull. And we got to talk with the paleontologist. Love me some mentorship from passionate and experienced people in the community. So that's just an example how like where one interest popped up and then we worked in those forces of enchantment.
Fabulous example. I love everything about that. And in fact, as you were talking, I was thinking about, well, what if somebody came up with this dinosaur theme and they thought, but what I really want right now is to learn more about literature. And you just kept pulling away from it. You kept thinking, well, we're going to do literature over here and dinosaurs for science. Literally everything can teach anything.
Yes.
So you can look at etymology, you could look at dinosaur poetry, you could look at books about dinosaurs, you could let your child narrate what they've learned about dinosaurs spontaneously and jot it down and make a book of their own record. One of the examples in one of the activities in one of our Brave Writer products for young kids is to create what I call a little fact book. It's a mini book. And I recommend that you let your child sort of pick an interest like dinosaurs or sharks, and then you collect all the different kinds of sources that comment on that idea. So it could be poetry, it could be expert opinion, it could be research and data, how many dinosaurs were there during that era. It could be historical. It could also be narrative. Where do they show up in fiction and literature and in poetry? And you just collect all of those items and put them in a book. Your child could handwrite it or they could talk and you could write it for them. You can include photos and then you staple it together. Now, the reason I think this is a really important example is this. A lot of times parents say to me, I'm trying to teach my child writing so that they'll be ready for the essay when they're grown up. But what they think that means is teaching the essay in third grade. What they haven't understood is that it means teaching a child how to identify sources, what level of credibility they have,
Right.
and how many places there are to get information that you need. They may not be ready to put it synthesized in an essay with transitions and a viewpoint, but they can use the container of a little book to glue everything together and begin the experience of this sort of expository writing. But it's going to be so much more on their level, it'll be more pleasurable, and it will represent what their research did, as opposed to following a format and stuffing it with things they don't care about.
Yeah, again, that's real learning because it's meaningful for them.
That's right.
Okay, what are the 4 capacities for learning, and will you walk us through an example of applying them?
So the 4 capacities for learning are curiosity, collaboration, contemplation, and celebration. I call this the vitamin C, right? It's all C words, right? The vitamin C for learning. And the reason that this is an important set of ideas, in my view, is that when we are talking about what causes learning to stick, we can sort of spark the interest with surprise, mystery, risk, and adventure. But then how do we nourish it? What's the kindling and the firewood that we keep adding to the fire to keep it going? And of course, curiosity is foundational to all learning.
Yeah.
You can't require people to be curious, but you can be open to their curiosity and pay attention to it when it comes up. A good way to do that is to value every question your child ever asks you. I can already hear you groaning, possibly under the weight of the incessant question machine. So one of the activities that I recommend in the Brave Learner is to create what I call a great wall of questions, to dedicate your sliding glass doors or your whiteboard or a wall to questions for a week. get a little shoebox and stuff it full of sticky notes of all different shapes, colors, and sizes, and a few pens. And anytime a child or an adult asks a question during the week, it goes on the wall, the Great Wall of Questions. The question could even be something very simple like, why did Tommy get the blue toothbrush when I wanted it? It can be, why didn't anyone help me clean up the shoes in the hallway, from the mother? But it can also be questions like, what is a black hole? Or what time am I allowed to watch the Disney Channel? Or did, my favorite writer write any other books besides X, Y, or Z? So every kind of question goes on the wall. And of course, if those questions need immediate answers, like the dental appointment is at 2, you can tell your child the answer. But the real goal during the week is to amass all the questions with or without answers. You can even start creating question chains, which kind of happens naturally. Like if you start with a question, a child might say, how far away is the sun? So you write that down, and then someone says, well, I want to know how far away Pluto is from the sun. And you tack that on. And then someone else says, well, how did they come up with a way to measure how far away Pluto is? How do we know that? And they start building off of that. Who decided what a foot is? Why aren't we in the metric system? The next thing you know, you have this big chain all related to that first question. So you do that for a week. And then on a Sunday night, perhaps, you eat a nice dinner and everyone just takes turns pulling questions off the wall, answering them, discussing them, not answering them. But we are training kids to see, and the parents to know, that all the questions have value, and to externalize your curiosity. In introverted families, this is especially helpful because a lot of internal processors don't know that there will be a receptive audience if they put their question out there. Right. So by putting it on a wall, you're automatically valuing it and training everyone to be more curious. So that's one example of something that we do.
I love that. One study showed that 4-year-olds ask an average of 75 questions an hour. When those questions are answered fully, the follow-up questions are deeper, elaborating on the concept. Yes. Whereas because I said so is met with the same question on repeat. So they still ask the same amount of questions, but if you respond to their questions, then they go deeper with them and the questions get more profound and more interesting, and they learn more from them.
That's a beautiful piece of research. And if you happen to have it, I would love you to send it to me.
I definitely will.
Yeah, no, I would love to see it because that is literally my experience. We have this practice in my family that when we would watch television or movies with our kids, we do 2 things. One is we silence all commercials because that's our chance to talk about what we've been watching. So if we're watching network TV and there are commercials, we just silence them and we chat about what we've been just watching. But then the second practice is when we were watching movies, my husband at the time would pause the movie every so often and he would ask questions. And of course I did too. Once we got into the spirit of this practice, we would say things like, who are you rooting for right now? Who are we rooting against? Why are we rooting against that guy? Why aren't we rooting for him? We weren't asking questions like, do you like it or dislike it? Right. We were exposing the architecture of the story. Yes. We were helping our children actually be aware of how they were being, I mean, to use a strong word, manipulated or played, right? Like how we are being controlled by the narrative, by the music, by the images, by the setting, by the everything. But it was also simultaneously teaching them the literary plot arc. When we would get to the climax, we would say things like, what has to happen for this story to end? What do we need to know? Because usually you know what you're waiting to see happen. Is Mulan going to successfully lead China, or is she going to go home in shame?
Yes.
And kids can tell you that. But it's so much more powerful to do it right when they're in the middle of the movie, having all the thoughts and feelings, than to do it like a week later and say, here's a plot arc. How did it work for that movie? And they're like, I don't know. Do you see what I'm saying?
I love that. When we watch mysteries as a family, like sometimes we like to watch these Hallmark mysteries, which are pretty tame, like murder mysteries.
Yes.
And we have this sort of joke where one of the kids will pause the movie and yell foreshadowing, and then everybody has to say who they think did it and why they think that person did it. And it wasn't like just like you said, like it's not a worksheet. It didn't develop as a rule. It just sort of came up naturally as part of a family culture where you embrace curiosity.
I love that so much. And it's also the fluent use of literary device language that feels like it's a natural part of your life, not like this weird appendage that you're sticking on a book you love and you hate having to use those words because it ruins the story for you. You know, that's what school does. We go in, we're given this list to memorize, we try to apply them to our favorite books, and then we start hating the book. But if at home, the word foreshadowing is as comfortable to say as let's have pizza for dinner, then you start to discover that your kids can marshal that language very skillfully. Yeah. One of our favorite funny moments with Katrin, she's the youngest of 5 kids. Both of her parents are writing instructors. So we're like a very wordy family. And at like age 5, we were watching Mulan, I think it was, and she said something like, Mulan has a cornucopia of feelings. And we just all burst out laughing, like, how did she know to use that word in a metaphorical way, right? Where did that come from?
Beautiful.
Yes. And that's what happens if you embrace this sort of dialogue and if you encourage it. Just going back to the remote control conversation for a minute, my mom reminded me that she visited, we live in Ohio, she lives in California, and she visited one weekend to take care of the kids while my husband and I went away for my 40th birthday, I think. And they started watching a movie, and about 10 minutes into it, my middle child, Jacob, who was pretty young at the time, he was only 10, he paused the movie and he said, all right, Grandma, this is the part where we talk about the movie. And my kids all just started laughing because it was so well built into him. He was even doing it when we weren't present. So we thought that was pretty cute.
Oh, that's so cute.
I know.
Well, curiosity really is the fuel to the engine of learning. And oftentimes when kids are little, parents shut down and chastise kids' curiosity and self-directed learning because it can be inconvenient for parents who are focused on their own agenda. But it's the same fire that we long for in our homeschooling. It occurs naturally, so long as we don't put it out.
Completely. Yep, you've got it. That's exactly right.
All right, collaboration.
So collaboration is this notion that people work better in teams. This myth of independence that all homeschoolers cherish is just that. It's a myth. If you go into almost any contemporary workspace today, they literally have open floor plans so that there is more collaborating and less isolation in the workforce. Mm-hmm. This idea that we're trying to raise people to be independent is more about relieving parental exhaustion than it is about this more high-level learning goal. Now, do we want our kids at some point to be able to brush their teeth, tie their shoes, clean up their dishes, and go sit at the table and do a math worksheet without being nagged to death? Yes. But I would submit to you that that is not independent learning or independent self-care. That is simply maturity. That is a child who's gaining some mastery over their own sort of caretaking of self. Mm-hmm. Independent learning is happening all the time. It's just we're not valuing it. Mm-hmm. Our kids are over there independently figuring out how to use our iPhone, how to use the DVR, how to play with the Lego set, how to do Minecraft, how to get the cheat codes to beat Fortnite, right? Like they're learning all the time without your help. But we don't value what they're learning independently half the time because we don't even know it's happening. We don't know to value it. Collaboration is what our kids need. They need it in the places where their independence and maturity are not yet ready to take on whatever challenge is in front of them. And for some kids, that is the math problems. They need you to sit next to them and literally point to the next one to do because they need that extra ballast They're going to toggle back and forth between collaboration and independence. And so what I tell parents all the time is don't feel guilty. Help helps.
Yes.
Very simple. Help helps. When are you enabling and over helping? Oh, you'll know. You will know. You will discover that your resentment is growing, and you will discover that your child is not into it. So it's turning into a nag fest.
Right. Oh man, collaboration is my jam. I was super excited when I saw that was one of your superpowers.
Oh, I'm so glad. Well, and the crazy thing is this. Kids need collaborators all the way through high school. So this fantasy that they'll get to high school and suddenly do all their work without talking to you is also damaging. We don't want that. We want them talking to you. We want you reading their writing. We want there to be engagement. I love to share the story of when I wrote my first research paper in high school, and I woke up on the day of daylight savings, so we lost an hour, and I slept in because I was a teenager. And suddenly I realized there were not enough hours for me to type this paper. It was before computers, so you couldn't make a single mistake on a page, or you had to read the page.
Yeah, I remember that.
Okay, well, good. So I remember being just like devastated, and I knew I could not get this done in the day. And my mother, who was a freelance writer at the time, an expert typist, she offered to do the typing. She said, just read the paper to me and I will type it and we will get it done together. And I was in 10th grade and I was an A student. There was never a moment where I felt like her help was somehow an
Handicapping
enablement.
you.
Yes, no, it actually just felt like love. And I think that is the difference. If you are helping a child who doesn't want to be helped or doesn't want to do the task, that's when it becomes contentious. But if you are supporting a child who needs your collaboration to be successful, then you are fulfilling your ultimate role as a home educator.
Yeah, and collaboration is an essential, I mean, it's the way that successful adults function also. I mean, even in my work, as like a self-employed person, I am collaborating with you right now, and because of this collaboration, we're going to have this amazingly rich conversation that's going to resonate with so many people out there that wouldn't have happened if I said, like, no, I don't collaborate. Like, I work independently. The product is so much better.
Yes, absolutely. And the academic world that we think we're preparing our kids for is all collaborative. Every university, all the research institutions, they are all about peer-reviewed, peer-experienced work. You know, you throw your ideas out there, someone comments on it and throws it back at you. If you read any academic journal, the extensive footnotes, because we know that it has taken millions, literally billions of people for thousands of years commenting together to get to where we are today.
Yes. I mean, my bucket system class that I have is all about harnessing collaboration and like the structure of your homeschooling and parenting. The last episode of this podcast was with Dr. Ross Green about collaboration and discipline. I mean, it's a whole chapter in my Sage Homeschooling book as one of the 8 secrets to natural homeschooling. So I cannot emphasize how much I believe in it enough. And it basically just means to enter into partnership with your child, and it is magic.
Exactly. You're right.
All right. Contemplation.
All right. So contemplation is, you know, a nice C word. I didn't mean that everybody is going to be sitting in the lotus position looking out at the ocean. However, you know, meditation could be a valuable thing to add to your homeschool. But what I was considering more was this notion of what I call tireless learning, this ability to sort of deep dive and focus. So if your child is deeply engaged putting together a Lego set, they even have some setbacks. They accidentally break off a piece after they've carefully put it together, but they're sticking to it. That's what I call contemplative learning. It's a child who has a sustained focus. And that sustained focus is the goal. A lot of times we think, oh, math was the goal, or the Lego set is the goal. The goal is to cultivate an experience of what it means to sustain your focus through challenge in order to understand how you motivate yourself to do that when you need it. So we're often focused on like, what's the content we're delivering? Part of what I've done in this book, The Brave Learner, is I'm trying to also show you what the skills and values are that you are achieving when your child is becoming an educated person.
Right.
And
It's like process over product.
that's right. That's right. So if a child has the experience of being delight directed, a child has the experience of following their curiosity, has the experience of partnering with someone for a better outcome, has the experience of a deep dive and having a breakthrough, all of those experiences can be reaccessed again when they encounter more challenging material. They take those tools with them to college and into adulthood. So the section on contemplation is really helping parents value when that arrives and helping them understand how to create a context for that to occur.
Contemplation, I like to think of that as like the deep dive. It's
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and it's when parents can get judgy if they're not careful. So surrender to the deep dive, because that is a natural way that we all learn. And it's why I call the segment at the end of this podcast where I recommend more resources for contemplating each topic, the deep dive. Skills transfer across dimensions of life. So hold the space for those deep dives when they happen, even and especially when it's on with an interest that might not feel schooly and
Right.
might make you feel nervous. Embrace it, because focus, like you said, the value is in that process even more than the product.
That's right. Very good.
Okay, celebration. Talk to me about that one.
So celebration is this notion that when we accomplish a goal, we feel good about ourselves. Too often, school is about pushing kids through things they don't want to do for a reward at the end or a punishment. You know, the grading system is mostly punishment, only a tiny
Yes.
bit of reward. But the idea is we're going to evaluate and measure whether you performed according to some standard somebody else decided for you. And then we're going to tell you how you did according to that system. And in some cases, you know, they use check marks because somehow a check plus doesn't feel as bad. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
But it's all evaluation.
Same thing. Yeah.
Right. And then you'll find when you're reading like parenting books or books about chores, all these systems where you give stickers or you give money or you give us ice cream sundae.
Ugh.
It's sort of motivating kids to do what they don't want to do because there's something they'd rather have at the end.
Right.
That's the reward-based orientation to education. What I noticed is that celebration was a much better system, if you're even going to call it a system.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a marathon runner, which I like to tell people at every opportunity, because what else do you get out of running 26 miles? But, you know,
Bragging
admiration
rights.
from strangers, right? From strangers, right? So the point is, when I ran marathons, I didn't do it to get a grade. I certainly never even placed in my own age group. And yet they still give you a medal when you cross that finish line, because there is this recognition that for all the effort you've put out, you want to celebrate. You want to have something to show for it. You want to be able to brag about it. You want to have the ability to pat yourself on the back. So when I think about the effort our kids are putting into learning, a high five, a moment where we read the story and we really praise it, a hug, eye contact, even things like going out together for a walk to discuss the experience of what they just achieved. There needs to be some kind of context that lets the child know, I see you, I value what you did, here's how I'm showing it. That's what celebration is. And so often, these celebrations are happening inside your child. You're just not participating in them.
Yes.
So I'll give you a great example. My son, Liam, was a huge gamer and chess player. Of course, when I tell people he played chess, everybody is really impressed. When I talk about gaming, they are not. He was equally good at both. He was first board in chess, and he was on an amazing international team in gaming. When he was playing chess, I literally went to every chess match. Now, there was only one other parent foolish enough to go to chess matches. Do you know what they do at chess matches?
No.
They stare at a board for a really long time, and then they make a decision, and if you're lucky, the piece moves 4 spaces instead of 1. And then they sit again and stare at a board for another like minute and a half.
Thrilling.
There's no commentary, there's no conversation, nobody gets hurt, there's no ball flying through the air. It's very boring. But I went because this is my homeschooled child. I am proud of him. He's really good at chess. One night, I'm in the kitchen. I'm on my computer working, and Liam calls to me, "Hey, Mom, come here to the computer. I want to show you something." And I'm like, "I'm busy. I don't want to come to the computer." He insists, "Mom, get over here now. I need to show you something." So second alert, I came to life. I walk over to the computer. I said, "What's going on?" He says, "The team I'm on for Defense of the Dark Arts is being broadcast right now in South Korea because we are in the top 10 teams in the world and we're having an epic battle and I'm playing and I want you to watch." And this moment hit me that I had not ever celebrated his gaming the way I had celebrated his chess playing by being in the room for chess. A game that is so dull, you could fall asleep standing up. Meanwhile, bright colors, explosions, things dying. I could have been watching that.
Oh, what a powerful story.
And I didn't know. And so when the game was over, I had him go through and show me every badge he had earned, every level he had beaten, what his role on the team was, because I had not celebrated the development of all that skill.
Yeah.
And it mattered. We need to do that. It's not just get the math page done. It's, aren't you awesome for answering those problems and doing that? How does that feel? Do you feel like you know what to do with this? It's more than just, okay, good, we're done now. Let's move on to the next thing.
Yeah. I mean, celebration is one answer to the question I get often of if we're not using praise and rewards, and you can listen to episode 21 of this podcast with Alfie Cohn to learn why we want to walk away from those things. But then what is a more natural and healthy alternative? And celebration could be that as you describe what you observe and ask open-ended questions and just be authentic in your shared joy, followed by kind of this natural rest.
Absolutely. And in fact, one of our practices in Brave Writer is something we call Poetry Teatime, where we set a beautiful table, we make something warm and yummy to drink, we put out good snacks, and then we just read poetry. There's no analysis. To me, that's a good example of a celebration of poetry, right?
Yeah.
And then there are personal celebrations. So I found out, years in, that Liam was memorizing poetry at night each night next to his bed. He never told me. That is a
Aw.
private celebration of
Yeah.
poetry. So part of what I want people to recognize is that celebration is the result of your own motivation. It's not a reward. It is literally the overflow of joy that comes from caring about a thing.
And then sharing in that together adds this whole other dimension to it.
Definitely.
Okay, what are the 4 points of entry and what might they look like?
So the 4 ports of entry are the mind, the body, the heart, and the spirit. And what I mean by that is learning comes through any one of those, not just your brain. We tend to focus so heavily on the mind, and yet it's possible that you could access learning through a different gateway. Some kids need the body activity. They need breaks. They need a nurturing lighting environment. I remember a family telling me that their kids were really struggling to do math. And the boy one morning said to his mom, "If you would just make me a pot of tea and let me sit by the window where I can see the city outside," because they lived in an apartment, he's like, "I think I could do math better." They ended up lighting a candle, they made tea, and his sister then joined him. And she said it completely transformed how he did math. But we don't think that way. We think, oh, they're being disobedient or blocked or resistant. And we try to problem solve the curriculum when maybe it's just the environment. So giving the body what it needs is helpful. Taking a brain break. Josh McNeil of Neurologic wrote a fabulous book called 101 Brain Breaks. We used it all the time. It's got all of these ways of injecting the body into the learning experience. So you might do a lot of table time and then you get up and you do some big deep breaths, you jump on the trampoline, you run around the house, but he's got 101 of them in there, and they're just fabulous. When we're talking about the mind, we tend to always focus on intellect and not recognize that there are other ways the mind is used. It's used in that sort of artistic manner, that being an artist draws on the brain just as much as solving math problems.
Yeah, the different intelligences.
That's right. So we can focus on the fact that the child is being well-rounded, not just being focused on, are they doing the academic aptitudes? And then when I talk about the heart, I'm talking about a love connection. And that can be to the teacher, or it can be to the subject, or it can be to the home environment, or it can be to the activity. But learning blooms when a feeling of connection is a part of the learning experience. So it's up to us to find that connection.
School has, all that is so, I completely agree with all of it. And I think it's something that often can get forgotten because school has really skewed our expectations here. So it really serves us well to believe our children when they show us what they need and accept who they are today and build our homeschooling around that.
100%. In fact, one of the real revelations for me that didn't really come until my kids were teenagers, but I think it could be applicable to younger kids. When I talk about the port of entry, the spirit, I focus on the capacity of a child for compassion and empathy. It is astonishing how much more children are interested in learning anything when they feel compassion for a circumstance that isn't their own. So when my daughter wanted to become a vegan because she suddenly became interested in animal rights and animal treatment, that opened science to her in a way it had never been open to her before. So one of the ways we can access learning is to tap into a child's natural capacity for compassion. My son Jacob is a human rights lawyer today, and that is because we spent so much time studying civil rights and social justice issues and documentaries. And he was exposed to that, and that got him interested in politics and history in a way that the textbooks and the normal readings never did. So when I'm talking about these ports of entry, you won't necessarily use all of them all the time, but if there is a wooden, dead to rights subject in your child's life, think about, is there a hidden port of compassion that might draw them into it in a fresh way?
Yes, we actually have an event coming up in our Hack School group where we're going to be putting together care packages to give to people who are living on the street. And that came to be because just as we were driving around, my kids would see these people and they would ask what they could do to help. And so they did some research around it, and there's math and trying to figure out how many of which things they need, and they're reading up on which things have been shown to be most helpful, and they're having to write letters to people to ask for donations and support for getting the materials to put these packages together. And all of that is really spirit motivated.
That's great.
Okay, let's talk about comparison, because comparison can lead a lot of us homeschooling mamas astray from keeping up with academic levels to houses. And I know you talk a lot about this in the book. So talk to us about how you've seen comparison undermine homeschooling success.
Yes. So one of the beauties of the last 25 years is the dawn of the internet. I always call it the watershed event of my whole life. There's before the internet and after, and for me, they are two completely different lives. I began homeschooling before the internet. So during the early years, we did not have social media. We didn't have a way to see what was going on in Mississippi. We only had our own state, which for me was California. There was one homeschooling sort of newsprint magazine that was super popular, almost predating the common discussion board forum format. We would write letters to this one mom, and then she'd post a bunch of questions in this newsletter, and then we would write letters to her, and then she'd compile all the answers. We would comb these things. I would highlight them. That was the extent, really, of my experience of comparison. It was without photographs. It was in very short sound bites. And then all my local friends, we were pretty homogenous and similar to each other and lived in similar houses. So I didn't struggle with that comparison. The comparison I was dealing with was to what I thought standard education should be, or trying to live up to a philosophy or a method. And it had plenty of its own pains, that's for sure. But what I've seen happen since the internet is fascinating. It is a boon to homeschooling. You have more choices than ever. You have more ways to connect and make friends than ever. But what happened is suddenly we could see literally the inside of other people's houses. And because photography is an art form, sometimes it just looks like art.
Yeah.
And your house never looks like art when it's not in a photograph. Your house just looks like where you live. And so this need to sort of project a happy image of what it means to be a family all the time, I think has been really damaging to homeschooling. Worse, some of those early homeschool leaders, people I knew personally, in fact, have gone on to be hypocrites. They were living a lie. So on the external, they're traveling around, going to conventions, talking about what their lives are like. And at home, they are living a completely different version. And then they hit, their 50s and they start admitting how awful things were. Oh yeah, there are a couple that have been on the circuit sort of going around and explaining the fraudulence of their own families. We know also that there are the public ones who've been on TV who've, surfaced molestation, other things in their homes. So here's what I always want to say to families is this. You are responsible to make the best of the family and home that you have. You are free to experiment. You are not required to live up to anyone else's expectations. Your own are more than sufficient to condemn you anyway. So let's just start with the raw material of our own families, our own environments, and max it out. Max it out like it's a credit card you get to spend every penny on. Just max it out and be proud of that effort. My homeschooling mentor, Dottie, back when we lived in these little condos in California that had no backyards, her son wanted to build a fort. We had no backyards. I just want to remind you of this. He wanted hammers, nails, boards. She's like, well, what space do we have outdoors that he can use? And she decided to consign the D unit parking space to fort building. So they parked their van on the street. He took over the D unit and started building a fort next to the minivan in the C unit space. That is what I call a success. That is maximizing your options, not saying no, not feeling bad, not wishing you earned more money. She and I that year, living in Southern California, she had 3 kids, I had 5. We earned the same amount of money. We were earning $36,000 a year working for a church. And we had 5 of our best homeschooling years. We just maximized our space. Every space was for learning. And that's how you do it. So to me, if I could encourage anyone listening, it's fine to get inspired. But when you start to feel condemned, look at your space and say, what could I do to this space? How could I do violence to my space, my imagination, to make this thing, to wring learning from this thing? That's what I would recommend.
Yes to all of that. I think I'm a minimalist, and I enjoy like interior design, and so I occasionally post pictures of like a random corner of some room in my house, and it will get like a gajillion likes. And then I'll post a picture of like my kid playing with the approximately 4 million Legos that are all over the living room floor, and it'll get significantly less likes. And I repeatedly say on Instagram, I am never going to only post pretty corners of my house. I'm never going to do it. Like, I don't care how many likes it gets me. This is not an interior design blog. Like, this is our real lives, and I'm going to keep sharing our real lives with you. So you're going to get a picture of muddy boots all over the entry floor, and then, maybe, so I gave myself like a limit, like no more than once a week will I have a pretty picture of my house in my feed, because that's such a small like that's not our mission, that's not our priority, that's not our focus. Like I enjoy organizing things. I took a picture, I had to move some furniture around, and so just for my own pleasure and enjoyment, I made all of the picture books into a rainbow on this one shelf, and I posted a picture in my story, and I said, I fully accept that this will look like this for like 4 minutes tops.
Yes, exactly.
And that is wonderful, because if me putting these books in a rainbow is like that surprise and gets my kid excited to come pull off all these books, and like that's awesome. That's a beautiful thing.
I like it. That's perfect.
Okay, let's talk about screens or technology. I talked with Leah McDermott in episode 15 all about screens, but I'm excited for us to touch on this too, because it's something I'm asked about all the time, and we are really in alignment.
It's all anyone wants to talk about.
Yes!
I always crack up. Yes.
Yes, I get it all the time. And we're really in alignment in saying that the research does not support the villainy of modern technology in our children's lives the way that it's made out to be, and that their pursuits involving technology can be just as rich and valuable as other interests. There's this like rose-colored nostalgia for the good old pioneer days, and it just seems to breed this fear and prejudice that values like paperback books and shames ebooks or audiobooks. But they're all good reading. Like that's all reading, and it's all good, and you can enjoy a story in a variety of ways. So I can personally attest to the fact that you will learn the same from the ebook version of the same homeschooling book as you will from the paperback version or the audio version that I'll record one day. So, I mean, my kids can play Legos and build in Minecraft, both good. I mean, the internet puts the world's entire repository of knowledge at your child's fingertips, for crying out loud. So share with us how technology can be a value add for a homeschooling family.
So I think it reminds me of Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen, which is a hilariously funny book. And it opens with the heroine reading a novel. And this man, naturally, with some kind of glasses on or something, is looking down his nose at her, wondering why she's not reading a volume of, scientific information about birds or something like that, like some kind of almanac. Yes. And he was saying how if you're reading novels, you're not learning anything. That learning would only be achieved if you were reading these sort of studious style books. And Jane Austen is just poking fun at the whole thing, right? She's trying to kind of create this breakthrough space for the pleasure reading that she was creating by writing. It's ironic because we see her books now as high literature,
right,
academically needed, and she was just trying to write a good book, a good yarn for people to enjoy. Every new technology or new season is suspicious. The people who are not, who didn't grow up with it, so the previous generation is always suspicious of the latest and greatest technology. Growing up, television was the big enemy. We were told never to sit too close to the screen. We were constantly having our eyes checked. And, all those parents now are watching cable news in a nursing home and seem fine.
Yes.
So, well, not fine necessarily, but you know what I'm saying.
Yes.
But the point is that if we can start not with suspicion and fear, but curiosity, right? Because there may be times when your hunch pays off. You're worried that your child is seeking refuge in a website, and it turns out the website is nefarious, and you weren't paying attention because you were trying to follow a philosophy that technology is fine. We're not talking about aligning with an ideology.
Right.
You want to stay connected to your child. So you want to pay attention to the role this thing has in their lives. So a couple things I like to point out. So I'm just going to give you a quick run through. So a lot of times I have a parent who says to me, well, technology ruins my child. Too much screen time, and they start melting down, and they're just not a good person, so I'm not going to let them go on. What I like to do at that point is ask a follow-up question. What does melting down mean to you? Is it melting down because you took him away right when he was about to break through that level, and he knows how long it will take him to get to that point again, and now he doesn't get to have the payoff of beating the level? Is it that he needs a brainstorming partner so that he can go back and accomplish the thing he was trying to accomplish? Kids get frustrated when they're trying to learn the unicycle and they keep falling off. The same thing is true with trying to move up a level in a video game or trying to beat your score on Wii bowling. Everybody who plays with their little app phones, whether it's Tetris or, solitaire, has that same drive. But for some reason, when a child shows frustration, the same frustration we see on a soccer field or a baseball team, we treat it pathologically. Whereas if they're melting down on the soccer field, we don't say, well, that's it, you're off the team. You keep melting down when you play soccer. No, we say, here, have an orange, hydrate. Let's talk about how to score goals. We re-enter with more renewed energy.
What can we learn from that last experience?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we don't vilify the experience. We help them cope with it.
Right.
So when we're talking about screens then, I think it's about your child and not the screen. What role does it play in this child's life? How can you support your child in having a successful, happy screen experience? How can you support your child in having the breakthrough they crave? How can you help your child know that you are on their side? Not overly valuing chess and completely undervaluing Defense of the Dark Arts.
Yes. I mean, even when it comes to, like you brought up the safety thing, I try to think about the virtual world just like it was a setting in the real world. So, if just because I wouldn't drop my 7-year-old alone in the middle of downtown Seattle doesn't mean that I'm going to say all cities are bad and we should have no contact with them. Like there's a lot of space in between those two conclusions or those two choices. Like, well, while he's 7, I'll be walking downtown with him and he might ask to go run around that park on his own, and I'll say, great, where are the safe boundaries so you don't get hit by a car, and he'll point them out and we'll agree, and then he'll go and he'll run around the grass and I'll be sitting nearby reading a book. Like we collaborate around how to make these things safe and how to still have connection and presence and how we can utilize these things and these resources and other people in a way that adds value. And all of those same conversations can happen around technology without vilifying it or shaming it or saying it's all bad.
Yes, I agree. And in fact, my kids have made rich relationships online and have traveled to see those friends. My daughter met a whole bunch of girls who were European on an Elijah Woods fan board. Jacob made a good playing friend when he was doing Halo online, and we met him as a family in San Francisco. My daughter, Katrin, was a part of an online chat that I personally don't even think was a great idea for her to be on it. It was one of those things I didn't even know she was on. And she made a friend in New Zealand that she has now been friends with for 13 years. And she's going to get to finally meet him next year. We, Skyped with his parents, saw their home. I made sure he was real,
Yeah.
But she discovered him before I knew. So sometimes in our anxiety, we are actually short-circuiting adventure, the thing we talked about at the beginning of this call. And not all adventures turn out well. My parents put me on a bus to go to the mall when I was 12 years old, and a man tried to take advantage of me in a store, and I got away. So not all adventures turn out perfectly well, but she was not wrong to send me on that bus.
Yeah, you can't shelter them from all of the adventures because then they don't get to live their lives. They miss out on all the good stuff too.
That's right.
Yeah.
And they find really good relationships. I mean, they can find, as adults know, we've all found so many good relationships. I saw a really cute meme yesterday. I'm just going to share it. Maybe everybody's already heard it by now, but it just struck me. It said, me, why are you, this is a mom talking to a kid. And so that said, me, : why do you find it interesting to watch other kids play the game instead of you just playing it? Why are you watching YouTube with other kids playing the game? And then under it, it says, also me, : turns on the TV, puts on HGTV to watch other people buy houses.
Yes.
And I thought, Exactly. Isn't that great?
Yes, absolutely. And just like you said, we have all those same dynamics with the internet too. Like I have my absolute best friend in real life, my best girlfriend in real life. We grew our relationship through the internet.
Exactly. Me too.
Yeah.
That's the same. Yep.
Okay, so let's talk about that role modeling piece. I talk about role modeling in almost every episode of this podcast. And as I've said before, one of the most consistent pieces of feedback I see in reviews for the Sage Homeschooling book is how amazing it was for them to realize that nurturing their own curiosities and passions and well-being is one of the greatest gifts they can give their children as a homeschooling parent. That this homeschooling thing isn't something you do to your children, but a lifestyle you live with your children. So one of my favorite moments in your book was when you had this realization, and I'm going to quote it again. In a fit of amazement, I realized I loved learning. We shifted from mom as homeschooling teacher to mom as a partner in a shared learning adventure. I love hearing you shout that from a proverbial rooftop. Shared learning adventure. So explain how role modeling factors into homeschooling.
Yeah, that's such an interesting word choice. I get where you're going with it for sure. One of the things I focus on in my book and in my teaching is what I call awesome adulting. Being the adult that you were sort of meant to be. Like you got to grow up for a reason. It wasn't just to recycle your childhood through smaller people. You've already been a child. So I don't want your whole world to be PBS TV shows and Raffi over the radio. Part of your adulthood opportunity is getting to do cool things, to study things in a deeper, more intentional way without the distraction of school or without feeling like you are required to take a test. So in that way, it provides a role model. But I will say this, and this is absolutely not a criticism. It is a comment on the term. If I use the language of role modeling, parents stay focused on their kids.
I can see that.
Yes, and I actually want them to be focused on themselves. In other words, we aren't doing something hoping our kids catch on.
Yeah.
We're just doing something.
Role modeling is like the byproduct of living a rich life for yourself.
There you go. It provides them, and I do say, in connection with what you're saying, I say if you lead an awesome adult life, your kids start to view adulthood as awesome. But if all they are presented with is weary responsibility, oh my gosh, my job is horrible. We don't have enough money. You guys never do what I need you to do. It's hard to keep a clean house.
Just wait till you get to be an adult and you'll see.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, your boss would never let you come in late. He's going to hold you. Why would you even bother? You may as well play video games as long as possible.
Yes.
So I think that's how it fits in. I agree with you.
Yeah, no, and I love that semantic point. You're completely right. It's funny because role modeling, I usually use that term because that's what gets parents to be motivated enough to really put in the effort around what I'm telling them to do or suggesting that they consider. Because if I say, hey, just for yourself, live an awesome life and grow into being your best self, it's like, I'm really focused on my kids right now. Okay, so for your kids, let's focus on your kids, role modeling, quote unquote. Yes. Now go be your best self and live your best life. And then that's sort of like the doorway to get in. But you're totally right. The role modeling piece is a byproduct more than the actual thing.
That's right. That's great.
#feminism. Okay, the last thing I want us to talk about today is Payday, which is just kind of this small concept in your book, but I really thought that I wanted to touch on it. It's just the perfect note to end this fantastic conversation with. Explain to us what that is, because I have to tell you, I share a lot of these on Instagram because they are the inspiring affirmations that keep me going.
Oh, I love it. That's fabulous. So, Payday occurred, the concept of payday is the idea that when your child accomplishes something that you've longed for, let's say they get accepted into college or they get their first job or they're reading for the very first time, that is the moment that you feel rewarded for all the heart and hard work and investment you've made in this child. So I remember one day I was on the phone with my friend and I was telling her that Johanna had just gotten accepted to Ohio State University. And she just started laughing. She goes, "Payday." I said, "What does that mean?" And she says, "Well, Julie, we don't get any money. So I just count every time something happy happens with my kids as that moment of my pay coming home to me. And it's a way for me to affirm to myself that, yes, this is a cause and effect relationship. I poured in, this came back." And I loved it. And suddenly I was seeing paydays everywhere. I was suddenly recognizing, hey, my child just learned to read. Hey, my dysgraphic son just took a whole page of notes in a class. Oh my gosh. It suddenly made me value those transactions in a way that I hadn't before. So that's why I like that language.
Yes, and it can be, sometimes it's small things, sometimes it's big things, but when you are looking for those paydays, you find so many more of them. I recently posted this picture of West, my 7-year-old, laying in the snow. And we were in the mountains and he had just spent hours sledding. And I happened upon him just lying there. He had this look on his face that it wasn't excitement or exhaustion, just blissful contentment. His cheeks were pink and his hair was sweaty and every muscle in his body was perfectly still, which is rare for this very high energy kid. And I quietly asked, "What you doing?" And he responded in a whisper without missing a beat, like it was perfectly obvious, "Snow bathing." And
oh my gosh, how adorable.
It was a payday for me, this wonderful kid who is really high energy. And if he was living a different life in school, his gifts might be completely lost and he might believe that his way of being was wrong. But in this life, he is celebrated and grounded and connected. And I just felt that so profoundly in those little words, "I'm snowbathing." Like, this is my why. This is the life he was designed for. And that's kind of what natural parenting is to me, giving our kids the lives they were designed for, because, including myself, because that is where we all thrive. So payday, look for those paydays.
Fantastic. That's a great example.
Okay, let's move into our Q&A. So I posted in the Sage Parenting Tribe on Facebook that we were going to chat about being a brave learner today and asked if anyone had any questions about it. A few different people asked about your philosophy of homeschooling, and I thought that would be a good one for you to speak to because in the book, you really talk about how you don't subscribe to any one specific philosophy, but more than that, there isn't one right philosophy that you land on and discover to be the winner for all time, that you lean in different directions in different seasons, and that flexibility is a bigger value add than any loyalty to a philosophy. Is that an accurate interpretation?
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love you. I love how you use language, by the way. It's gorgeous.
Thank you.
Yes. So I did subscribe to various philosophies throughout homeschooling and found that very frustrating. I always felt like I was late to every single one of them. There was always like this party going on and I came in and I never fully got in the flow because I should have known sooner, better, like I should have started when they were 5, whatever thing somebody else was doing. And I always felt like I was on the knife's edge. Like if there was an aspect of the philosophy that I didn't agree with, well, then you don't get to fully participate in the group because now you're disseminating a false version and only the truest, purest version is the one you can count on to deliver the results that we all long for. And it took me, 10, 12 years of homeschooling before I started to realize, wait a minute, there are more people like me than all these ideological purists out there. Most people are just scrapping together whatever they possibly can to stay sane and to achieve their goals. And I started noticing that I felt the happiest and my kids were learning the most when I was paying attention to our experience of learning together. Not when I was trying to make sure we were holding up the characteristics of some philosophy of education.
Yeah, like if something works, you do it because it works for your family and not because you don't make your decisions based on trying to fit into a box.
Correct. And so what that looks like is, let's say you are trying to subscribe to an unschooling philosophy, and then you hear about this really great book, this tool that's supposed to teach reading. But you think to yourself, well, I can't use the tool because unschoolers never touch curriculum. So now you're in this double bind. You see that your child has a need. You see something that you think could help them, but you are so beholden to the philosophy, you discount a whole set of options that might be good for you. So I like to talk about the all option buffet. Make sure all your options are always on the table, including private school, including charter schools, including public schools, including tutoring. Because when you do that, you give yourself the maximum opportunity to find a good fit for your child. And that's the whole point of homeschooling. If you want to grow as a person, widen the circle of influences you allow into your life. So if, let's say, you are a hardcore unschooler who really believes in all the natural learning properties, I wonder what would happen if you took a class at a co-op or even a watercolor class where you're learning how to paint from scratch. I started grad school the same time that we started our unschooling experiment. And I was shocked to discover what a relief it was to go to a class where somebody had prepared materials specifically for me. And I suddenly realized, some of my kids liked that feeling that I had come prepared. That felt like love to them, being left to discover on their own. And I'm not saying that unschoolers don't prepare. The good ones are constantly thinking 6 steps ahead and providing all kinds of resources to be discovered, to be explored. But when my kids hit that sort of critical middle school, early high school age, they were looking for direction in the same way that I went to grad school looking for direction. I wanted someone who was an expert to lead me because I needed that direction at that time for a different experience. So one of the takeaways for me is that there are elements of learning available in every system.
I'm stepping in here just to speak to something quickly that I digested a little more fully when listening back to this conversation. A conversation I am totally geeking out over, by the way. Isn't Julie great? I call our approach natural learning and consider what we do unschooling, and I'm a big fan of self-directed learning. I find Julie's definition of unschooling to be narrow. For example, that unschoolers wouldn't use a curriculum or set up thoughtful learning invitations for their children or take classes. If someone wants to learn something and a curriculum is a helpful tool to learn that thing, we use one. And if I see an interest or need in one of my children, I offer them a means to work on that thing. If a class sounds appealing, we take it. She explains that her child would have an interest and she would use that as a doorway to invite deeper learning in meaningful ways. In the beginning of this episode, we talked about what real learning is, and I agree with her. So in a Julie Rachel Venn diagram, there would be a large overlapping middle. Philosophically, I think the distinction really just boils down to less coercion and more freedom and trust on the unschooling side, from my perspective, and anyone is welcome to respectfully disagree. So my motivation here is not to argue that one way or another is right, but simply to offer an expanded meaning for the word unschooling. And those points she just made about loyalty to certain dogmas getting in the way of seeing all your options and doing what's right for your family in the present, and it being tremendously beneficial to learn from a wide variety of sources and people who can bring you a fresh perspective beyond your echo chamber, I agree, and even have spoken specifically to that issue in episode 14 of this podcast. And I hope that you can see that value play out here in the variety of friends who come share conversations with me on this podcast. Okay, let's move into a day in the life. So describe your favorite day this week and share with us why you loved it. And I know you've had some really good days recently, so...
Yes, absolutely. So my oldest son, Noah, just got married. He's 31. All the kids came in. They live all over the place. So my daughter, who lives in Mexico, came. My son, who was living in Geneva and is now on his way to Thailand, came. My daughter from San Diego, my son from Miami, and then relatives from all over the world. And it was a huge celebration day. Noah is my oldest child, so the guinea pig, the experiment. And we chose to dance to the song One Light, One Sun by Raffi. And I felt like that symbolized our shared love for each other and the journey of me becoming a parent, becoming a mother. He's the person who made me a mother, and also his own very unique, very autodidact style of learning his whole way through.
I totally teared up watching you dance to that song on your Instagram stories.
Awesome.
It was a beautiful moment, and thank you for sharing it with all of us.
You're welcome. It meant a lot to me, and I just know that it's ahead for all of you, so that's awesome.
All right, now our deep dive, which I warned you was coming in our contemplation segment, but the show notes can be found at sageparenting.com/podcast26, where you can also subscribe and get future show notes sent right to your inbox. So Julie, give us all of your favorite resources for people to dive deeper into this topic of being a brave learner.
All right, so let me just open up my little index here so that I give you the good ones. So I really like Josh McNeil, 101 Brain Breaks and Brain-Based Educational Activities.
Okay.
That book is absolutely fantastic. It's very short. It's very easy to use. I really love Barbara Oakley. She wrote a book called A Mind for Numbers, How to Excel at Math and Science Even If You Flunked Algebra. That book is fantastic if you are finding it challenging to teach math to your kids, or if your kids struggle. She comes from a literature background who then became a mechanical engineer. So she tells that journey very adequately.
I've never heard of that one.
Yeah, oh, she's fantastic. Let's see. I also really like, I'm looking for the title. Hold on, let me find the other book that I really love. Oh, here we go. 12 Brain-Mind Learning Principles in Action. And this is by Renata and Jeffrey Kane. They are my little brain-based learning researchers who I always go back to. They're just phenomenal. Renata Kane, Jeffrey Kane.
Okay. And we're going to link to all these in the show notes. So you guys will have links for all of this good stuff.
Fantastic. I would say those are the top 3 that are outside homeschooling. Okay. I like people to read outside homeschooling. I'm like into it. I feel like it gives you a different perspective. Like, these educators have dedicated their PhD careers to understanding how learning works. So let's find out what they have to say, right?
Yes.
Like, let's get out of the echo chamber of what we're all saying to each other all the time.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I have an insatiable appetite for research, so I will definitely be looking into some of those books.
Very good.
Your podcast, A Brave Writer's Life in Brief, is on my frequently listened to list. It's way up there. I listen to it all the time, and your new season is so good, by the way. Mad props. Your new season. I love the format. Your new book, Brave Learner, everyone should grab a copy and give it a read. When does it officially come out?
February 5th, 2019. If you are listening to this podcast before the order date, we have 2 free gifts for anyone who pre-orders. Just go to thebravelearner.com and enter your receipt number, and then we will send you those 2 free gifts on the day that it releases. We also have a conference happening this summer in Cincinnati about the book, and I will be traveling all over the world, really, ending in New Zealand, speaking about the book at conferences. So if you go to thebravelearner.com, you can see my travel schedule and see if I'm going to be near you.
And then you have your Brave Writer online classes, which I am bringing up because I would like to formally request that you put a songwriting class on there, which my 13-year-old would love. I mean, that's basically poetry, which is right up your passion alley.
So it's funny that you bring that up, because there used to be a songwriting class, and I taught it. That was years and years ago, and then we haven't had anyone who wanted to teach it, and it is now back on the list. They're actually rebuilding a songwriting class. So yeah, that's coming. I don't know how soon, but I've seen the list, and I know they're working on it. So
okay, I'm very excited. We will be enrolling in that for sure.
Oh, that's great. In the meantime, take playing with poetry. That class is incredible, and it will help the songwriting for sure. Brave Writer has a full suite of programs that you can, that are independent, that you work on yourself with your kids, or you can sign up for online classes where you have a writing coach with you. And we have a help inbox, help@bravewriter.com, to help you sort it out if you need help in understanding what to take for your family. Brave Writer is different. Our focus is on cultivating and nourishing the writing voice of your individual child and helping them access their insight, their ideas, their imagination, and the information they've consumed. So we start with the person, not with the subject, and then we build from there.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Julie, thank you so much for joining me and sharing this conversation. I've been looking forward to it for a while, and I know your time is really valuable, and you're so busy with your book coming out and your kid getting married. So thank you so much for sharing a little time with us and gifting us with all of your wisdom and experience.
Well, thanks for having me. You're a wonderful interviewer, and I love what you're doing online. I hope everybody follows you as well. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Julie.